A mother never forgets her son's birthday. I had flown across the country just to see him, to surprise him, to remind him that even though his father was gone, he still had me. But when I arrived at his doorstep, suitcase in hand and heart full of excitement, the door opened to my daughter-in-law's cold smile. She looked me up and down and said words that cut like knives. "Oh, we didn't plan to celebrate. He doesn't need anything this year." In that moment, my heart broke for my son. He was inside that house, probably thinking his family had forgotten him on his own birthday, while his wife, the woman he trusted, mocked the very idea of celebrating him. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just an old woman with a suitcase. I was his mother. And before I left that town, I was going to make sure she regretted every cruel word she said. My name is Helen Carter. I'm 78 years old, and this is the story of how I turned my daughter-in-law's cruelty into a revenge she never saw coming. The plane ride had been long, but I didn't care. Every bump of turbulence, every stiff hour in that cramped seat, I held on to one thought: I was going to surprise my son David for his 35th birthday. He had been through a rough year, laid off from his job for a stretch, struggling to find his footing, raising 2 young kids with a wife who never seemed to appreciate him. I thought maybe my visit could bring a little light back into his life. I wore my best cardigan, the soft cream one David always said made me look classy. My silver hair was pinned neatly, and I carried a small gift in my handbag, a framed photograph of him as a boy, sitting on his father's shoulders at the beach, both of them smiling as the waves crashed behind them. His father, Robert, had passed years ago, and I thought maybe that picture would remind David he still had family who loved him dearly. When the cab pulled up to their suburban house, I smiled at the sight of the balloons still tied to a mailbox post from their youngest child's party a week earlier. It made me think of the laughter of children, of cake and music, of joy. I imagined David would light up seeing me at the door. But when the door opened, it wasn't David standing there. It was Melissa, his wife. She wore a silk blouse and tight jeans, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her lips painted red as if she were heading to a party. But there was no warmth in her smile. "Oh," she said flatly, her eyes narrowing. "You're here." "Yes," I replied cheerfully, adjusting my suitcase. "Surprise. I came in for David's birthday. I couldn't miss it." She blinked, then tilted her head, smirking in a way that made my stomach twist. "Oh, we didn't plan to celebrate. He doesn't need anything this year." The words hit me like a slap. My son, my sweet boy who had spent his childhood making cards out of construction paper for my birthdays, who never forgot a single one even when he was broke in college, wasn't being celebrated by the very woman who vowed to love him? I steadied myself, swallowing the lump in my throat. "No celebration?" I asked softly. She shrugged, her tone mocking. "He's grown. Birthdays are for kids. Besides, we've been busy." I glanced past her into the house. David was sitting on the couch, the glow of the television lighting his tired face. He didn't see me yet. His shoulders slumped as he sipped from a can of soda, looking so small and weary despite his grown man's frame. My chest tightened. He looked like a man who had given up expecting joy. Melissa crossed her arms. "Well, you came all this way. You might as well come in. Just don't expect cake or candles." I forced a smile and stepped inside. The living room was tidy, almost too tidy, like a magazine spread. But it was cold, no decorations, no warmth, nothing to mark the day. "Mom." David's voice cracked as he looked up and saw me. His face lit up, his eyes wide with surprise. You came." I dropped my suitcase and hurried to him, wrapping my arms around him. "Of course I came," I whispered, hugging him tightly. "Happy birthday, my boy." He clung to me for a long moment, his body trembling as though he'd been holding back so much. I thought everyone forgot," he said quietly. My throat burned with tears I refused to shed in front of Melissa. "Not me. Never me." From behind us, Melissa sighed loudly, tapping her nails on the counter. "Well, if you two are done with the Hallmark moment, I'll order takeout. No point cooking tonight." David pulled back, embarrassment flooding his face. "Melissa." "It's fine," I said quickly, patting his hand. "Whatever works." But inside, my anger simmered. We sat together while Melissa scrolled on her phone, uninterested. David tried to act normal, showing me his favorite news show on the television, but I saw the way his eyes flickered with gratitude every time he looked at me. I had given him what his wife denied him: acknowledgement. Love. Later, when the takeout arrived, Melissa set it on the table without ceremony. No candles, no happy birthday, not even a cheap card. My son ate quietly, smiling faintly at my stories, while his wife talked about her plans for a weekend spa trip with her friends. When I excused myself to the bathroom, I lingered in the hallway, staring at the family photos on the wall. Most of them were of the children. Few had David in them. Fewer still had him smiling. I pressed my hand to one frame, my heart aching. He deserved better. He deserved a partner who celebrated him, who lifted him up instead of tearing him down. Melissa thought she had silenced his joy, that she could reduce his birthday to nothing. But what she didn't know was that she had sparked something fierce in me. Because while I came with a small gift, I also carried something far more powerful: knowledge of the family finances, of the investments Harold and I had left behind. Melissa thought she controlled David, that she could neglect him and still live comfortably. She was wrong. That night, as I lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling, I made a vow. If she thought she could erase my son's birthday, erase his worth, she was about to learn that no one erases what a mother protects. And by the time I was finished, Melissa's mocking words, "He doesn't need anything this year," would come back to haunt her. The next morning, sunlight poured into the guest room, but I had barely slept. My heart ached for David, for the way his shoulders had slumped when he told me he thought everyone had forgotten his birthday. 35 years old, and my boy had been made to feel like a burden in his own home. When I stepped into the kitchen, Melissa was already dressed to the nines: tight black jeans, a silky top, and gold hoop earrings. She was sipping coffee and scrolling on her phone as if she were a guest in her own house. David was at the counter packing the kids' lunches, his hair still damp from the shower, his shirt wrinkled but clean. I could see the dark circles under his eyes. "Morning, Mom," he said with a tired smile. "Morning, sweetheart," I replied, kissing his cheek. Melissa didn't even look up. "So you're staying for how long?" Her tone was sweet, but the edge in her words was sharp enough to cut. "I haven't decided yet," I said smoothly, pouring myself some coffee. "Don't worry, I won't be in the way." She finally looked up, her lips curled in that smirk of hers. "Oh, you're fine. We don't usually have guests for long. David and I like our routine." I caught the flicker of discomfort in my son's eyes. He didn't want me to feel unwelcome, but he was too worn down to contradict her. I sipped my coffee slowly, hiding the storm brewing inside me. She wanted me gone, that much was clear. But I wasn't going anywhere. Over the next few days, I began to notice things I hadn't seen before. Melissa spent money like water. Every afternoon, boxes from online shopping arrived: designer shoes, expensive makeup, jewelry she didn't need. I overheard her bragging to a friend on the phone: "David doesn't even check the statements. He just pays. He's too busy being grateful I'm still here." Grateful. That word made my skin crawl. David, meanwhile, worked long hours at a modest accounting job he had finally landed after months of searching. He came home exhausted, but Melissa barely acknowledged him. If dinner was cooked, it was from a meal kit she barely touched. If the kids needed help, it was David who tucked them in, read stories, and folded their clothes after. One night, I found him sitting alone at the kitchen table with a stack of unpaid bills, his head in his hands. "Son," I said gently, laying a hand on his shoulder, "is everything all right?" He forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Money's tight. Melissa's been stressed, so I don't want to bother her with it." Stressed? She was out every other evening with her friends, dropping money at spas and restaurants. My anger simmered hotter. But I didn't let it show. Instead, I began writing everything down in my small leather notebook: the deliveries, the phone calls, the nights she disappeared without explanation. I kept receipts when I could, and I even noted the nights she came home smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. I wasn't just observing. I was building a case. One afternoon, while Melissa was out, David asked me to watch the kids while he ran to the grocery store. I tidied up the living room, putting away toys and folding blankets, when I noticed an envelope sticking out from under a stack of magazines on the coffee table. Curiosity tugged at me. I slid it out and froze. It was a credit card statement. The balance was staggering, nearly $10,000, all charged in Melissa's name. Designer stores, spa weekends, luxury restaurants. Not a dime spent on groceries or bills. My chest tightened. My son was drowning while she played queen. I tucked the envelope back carefully, my hands shaking. She was bleeding him dry, and he was too blinded by love, or fear, to stop her. That night at dinner, Melissa waltzed in late, tossing her designer bag on the counter. She kissed David's cheek lightly, then glanced at me. I hope you don't mind, but I booked a trip for next month. Just me and the girls. David will handle things here. David gave a small, tired smile. If that makes you happy. Happy? She looked radiant in her selfishness, while my son wilted like a neglected plant. I pressed my fork into my salad, forcing myself to stay quiet. Not yet. Timing mattered. If I confronted her now, she would spin it, make me look jealous or bitter. David might even defend her. No, I needed her to expose herself. So I planted my first seed. The next morning, I left a brochure on the counter, an old one from my safe deposit box at the bank. When Melissa noticed it, she raised a brow. What's this? Oh, just some old information about Harold's investments, I said casually, sipping my coffee. Your father-in-law was smart. He put things away for the family. Jewelry, stocks, even some antiques. Her eyes lit up like fireworks. Antiques. Yes, I said, pretending to be absent-minded. Some are still in storage. David doesn't even know all of it. Harold always said it was for when times got tough. I let the silence stretch, watching her face. She was practically salivating. That's very interesting, she said finally, her voice strained as she tried to sound casual. I smiled faintly. Isn't it? And just like that, she took the bait. From that day forward, she asked more questions about Harold, about what he left behind, about my plans. I pretended to brush them off, but every word went into my notebook. Every greedy glance, every slip of her mask, it was all evidence. I knew she was plotting. I could feel it in my bones. But what she didn't know was that I was plotting too. And the difference between us? She thought she was circling prey. But I was setting a trap. Melissa could only pretend for so long. Once I dangled the idea of Harold's investments and antiques, her mask slipped further each day. Greed has a way of seeping out. It sharpens voices, shortens patience, and clouds judgment. One evening after dinner, David sat with me in the living room while Melissa washed a few dishes. The kids had gone upstairs to play. My son leaned back in the armchair, sighing. Mom, I'm glad you're here. Things haven't been easy. I reached over, patting his hand. I can see that, sweetheart. He hesitated. Melissa's been, well, she worries a lot about money. Sometimes I think she pushes too hard. Before I could respond, Melissa called from the kitchen. Pushes too hard? David, I'm being realistic. You think your mom is going to be around forever? Someone has to plan. My jaw clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. David glanced at me apologetically, but Melissa came marching in, drying her hands. She looked at me with that sugary smile of hers. Evelyn, don't you think it's wise to talk about the future? About wills, assets, those antiques you mentioned? Her eyes glittered, sharp as glass. I took a slow sip of tea, watching her over the rim of my cup. Harold and I already planned, dear. Everything is secure. She laughed softly, though it sounded forced. Yes, but secure how? I mean, don't you think it would be easier if David and I handled it? We're young. We could protect it better. David frowned. Melissa, that's not your business. It is my business, she snapped, then caught herself, pasting that smile back on. I just mean we're family. Families share. Her words curled in my ears like poison. Families share. But she wasn't talking about love or memories, she meant money. I leaned back, giving her a calm smile. One day, Melissa. For now, everything's where it needs to be. The flicker of frustration in her eyes told me I'd struck the right chord. She wanted control, and I had denied her. That night, after they went to bed, I pulled out my notebook and wrote, "She is pushing harder. Soon she will slip." And she did. The very next week, Melissa tried again, this time in front of the children. We were in the living room. The kids were building blocks on the carpet while David checked emails on his laptop. I sat with my knitting, enjoying the quiet. Melissa walked in carrying shopping bags, her face flushed from another spree. She dropped the bags on the table and announced, "We need to update your mom's will, David. It's irresponsible not to." David looked up, startled. "Melissa." "No, I'm serious," she said, glancing at me. "Evelyn, don't you agree? You're not getting younger. If something happened, we need clarity." The children froze, their little eyes flicking toward me. David shut his laptop with a slam. "Melissa, enough. This isn't the time." But I didn't raise my voice. I looked at her calmly, then at the children. "Your mommy is just worried, that's all. But don't you worry, my dears. Grandma's always prepared." Melissa's cheeks flushed red. She stormed upstairs, muttering under her breath. Later, when I tucked the children into bed, the oldest whispered, "Grandma, why is mommy always mad at you?" I kissed his forehead softly. "Because sometimes grown-ups forget what matters most. But you don't have to worry about that." The next day, while David was at work, I caught Melissa in the backyard again, whispering into her phone. She thought I was inside, but I stood quietly by the open window. "No, she hasn't cracked yet," she hissed. "But she will. She can't hold on to it forever. Once we convince David, it's ours." She paused, listening. Then her voice lowered to a venomous whisper, "Yes. Once she's gone, everything will be mine." The words chilled me, but also steeled me. She had finally spoken the truth out loud. I pulled away from the window, my chest heavy but my mind razor-sharp. Melissa believed she was circling me like prey. But what she didn't know was that every word, every slip, every careless outburst was tightening the net around her. That evening, I made my next move. I casually mentioned to David that I was considering putting Harold's antiques and jewelry into a safe deposit box. "Just for peace of mind," I said. "Too many stories about theft these days." Melissa's fork clattered against her plate. Her eyes flashed. "A safe deposit box? Why? We could keep them here. Family should protect family." I smiled faintly. "Perhaps one day. For now, I'll handle it." Her lips tightened, her shoulders stiff. She excused herself from the table without another word. David looked at me, puzzled. "Mom, what was that about?" I patted his hand. "Don't worry, son. Just let her be." That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling with Harold's voice echoing in my mind. "Let them show themselves, Evelyn. That's when you strike." And I knew the time was close. Melissa wasn't patient. Her greed was bubbling over. Sooner or later, she'd make her move. And when she did, I'd be ready, with proof, with preparation, and with the kind of revenge only a mother could deliver. By early summer, Melissa could no longer contain herself. Her questions turned into demands. Her whispers into sharp commands. She was no longer trying to pretend she cared about David or me. She wanted control, and she wanted it now. It happened one Sunday evening. We had finished dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the kind of meal David always loved. The children were upstairs, giggling as they played. The three of us sat at the table, the dishes pushed aside, the quiet of evening settling in. Melissa set down her wine glass and fixed me with a smile that was all teeth. "Evelyn," she said, her voice low but firm, "I think it's time you stop clinging to everything. You should hand over the jewelry and the antiques now. We'll keep them safe." David looked up sharply, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Melissa, what are you talking about?" She waved her hand impatiently. "Come on, David. Be realistic. Your mother is old. She can't handle these responsibilities anymore. We should manage it. That way, there's no risk of anything being lost or misused." I dabbed my lips with my napkin, keeping my voice calm. "Everything is safe, Melissa. Just where Harold wanted it." Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. "Safe with you? In that old house? Things happen, Evelyn. Burglars, accidents. Wouldn't it be smarter to move everything now?" David slammed his fork down. "Melissa, stop it. This isn't your decision." She turned to him, her mask cracking. "Not my decision? I'm your wife. What affects you affects me. And if your mother can't see that, maybe.
Enough.
David's voice thundered. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor.
You've embarrassed me enough tonight.
Melissa flushed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She pushed back her chair and stormed upstairs, her heels clicking like gunshots against the hardwood. The room fell silent. David rubbed his temples, sighing deeply.
Mom, I don't know what's gotten into her.
I reached across the table, laying my hand on his.
Son, love makes us blind.
But sometimes, people reveal themselves.
And when they do, you must believe what you see.
He nodded slowly, his eyes clouded with sadness. When I went to bed that night, I knew the time had come.
Melissa was unraveling.
She wouldn't wait much longer before taking matters into her own hands.
So I prepared.
The next morning, while they were both at work, I went to the bank and placed a sealed envelope into my safe deposit box. Inside were copies of everything: Harold's trust papers, the appraisals of the jewelry, even notes I had taken of Melissa's outbursts. The originals stayed with me, hidden carefully. When I returned home, I set the stage for what I knew was coming. I left the jewelry box slightly ajar on my dresser, the glint of Harold's cufflinks just visible. I placed a folded note beneath the velvet lining, written in my neatest hand.
Greed will reveal the truth. Loyalty will inherit the future. And then I waited. It didn't take long.
That Friday night, I returned from a walk to find the front door unlocked.
My heart didn't race. I expected it.
When I climbed the stairs, my suspicions were confirmed. My dresser drawer had been pulled open.
The jewelry box was shifted.
But nothing was missing, except the note.
I smiled to myself. She had taken the bait.
At dinner the next evening, Melissa was jittery. Her hands trembled slightly as she served salad.
She laughed too loudly at nothing.
David noticed, frowning.
Are you okay?
I'm fine, she said quickly, darting a glance at me.
But I saw the truth. She was rattled.
She had read the note, and it had unsettled her. Later, when David stepped out to take a call, Melissa turned to me, her voice sharp.
What does it mean? I tilted my head. What does what mean?
That note, she hissed.
Loyalty will inherit the future?
What game are you playing?
I smiled faintly, sipping my tea. No game, dear. Just Harold's wisdom.
Her eyes burned with frustration. She pushed back from the table, muttering under her breath, and left the room. That night, I wrote in my notebook, she is restless.
Soon she will break completely. The moment is near.
The following week, David came to me with worry in his eyes.
Mom, I think Melissa's hiding something.
She's been making strange calls, disappearing at odd hours.
I don't know what's going on.
I placed a gentle hand on his arm.
Son, sometimes the truth hurts.
But don't ignore it when it's standing in front of you.
He looked at me, troubled, but nodded.
Melissa thought she was clever, thought she was circling closer to the fortune she imagined. But she didn't realize that every step she took was pulling the rope tighter around her own neck. And soon, in front of my son and the whole family, I would pull it completely. The house was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that settles like fog after a storm. David was upstairs reading to the children, his low, gentle voice drifting down the staircase. I sat in the living room with my knitting, the soft click of the needles steadying my thoughts. Melissa came in from outside, her heels clicking against the hardwood. She was dressed too finely for a quick errand: tight black trousers, a silk blouse, and a necklace I hadn't seen before, glittering unnaturally around her throat. She smelled faintly of perfume that didn't belong in this house.
She glanced at me, her smile brittle. Out late? I asked mildly.
Just dinner with friends, she said quickly, setting her bag down on the counter.
Nothing important.
But her hands trembled as she pulled off her earrings, her mask slipping at the edges. Later that night, when the house had gone still, I heard it, the faint creak of a floorboard, the shuffle of movement outside my room. I sat upright in bed, my lamp still glowing, and waited.
The door opened slowly.
Melissa stepped in, her eyes darting to the dresser. She froze when she saw me sitting upright, watching her.
Oh, she said, forcing a laugh.
I
was just checking to make sure the windows were locked. Were you?
I asked quietly, folding my hands in my lap.
Her gaze flickered to the jewelry box. I didn't move. I simply watched as her composure cracked. She licked her lips, glanced at the box again, and finally blurted, "Why don't you just tell us where everything is? The trust, the antiques, the fortune Harold left. It's not safe with you." Her voice shook, but her eyes gleamed with hunger. I let the silence stretch until it felt like a noose tightening. Then I said softly, "Harold was right about you." Her face drained of color. "What do you mean?" "He warned me. He said one day someone might try to marry their way into this family for money. That's why he built the trust the way he did." Her lips trembled. "That's ridiculous. I love David." "Do you?" I tilted my head. "Because I heard you. The morning of your wedding. I'll stay a year, maybe 2, then I'll divorce him once I have what I want." "Do you remember saying that?" Her eyes widened in horror. You were listening." "Yes." My voice was steady, cold as steel. "And since then, I've been writing down everything. Every phone call. Every demand. Every reckless move. I even know about Anthony." She gasped, staggering back. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but I do," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I know enough to show David. I know enough to show the entire family. And I know enough to make sure you will never touch a cent of what Harold left behind." For the first time, she was speechless. Her face contorted, fear, fury, desperation all flashing across her features. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. I smiled faintly. "Wouldn't I?" She spun on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, David found me in the kitchen, calmly making pancakes for the children. He frowned. "Mom, something's wrong with Melissa. She's been off." I set the spatula down and looked him in the eye. "Son, she's been more than off. She's been planning against you. Against all of us." He shook his head, disbelief clouding his face. "No, she wouldn't." But his voice lacked conviction. The cracks were forming. He had seen enough of her behavior to know something was wrong. That afternoon, I invited them both into the living room. The children were with neighbors, so it was just the 3 of us. I set a folder on the table and tapped it lightly. "Harold's trust," I said. "You should both know the truth." Melissa's eyes lit up, her greed shining through her fear. She leaned forward as David opened the folder. His brow furrowed as he scanned the pages. "This says, the trust bypasses me," he said slowly. "Yes," I said firmly. "Harold designed it that way. It all goes directly to Ethan when he comes of age. My role is to protect it until then." Melissa gasped. "What? That's insane. He can't just skip over you." David looked at her, his expression clouded with confusion. "Why does that upset you so much, Melissa? This is for our son." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Her face twisted with panic, her mask shattering completely. I watched quietly, my heart pounding but my face serene. The trap was working. Melissa had made her boldest attempt, and now she knew the truth. There was nothing for her to take. Everything she had schemed for, everything she thought she controlled, was slipping away before her eyes. But this was only the beginning of her downfall. Because the final act of my revenge wasn't just about protecting David's future. It was about stripping away the last of her lies and showing everyone who she truly was. And that moment was coming soon. The living room was still, the folder of papers lying between us like a verdict already written. David sat stiffly, staring at the trust documents, while Melissa trembled in her chair, her eyes darting from him to me like a cornered animal. This isn't real," she stammered finally, her voice shaking. "You're making this up, Evelyn. You've hated me since the day we met." I folded my hands neatly in my lap, my voice calm. "It's very real. Harold saw people like you coming long before you ever walked into this house. That's why the trust is structured to protect Ethan, and only Ethan. Greed doesn't inherit." Her lips curled, her voice rising. "You can't just shut me out. I'm his wife. I deserve." David slammed his hand on the table, his voice sharp and trembling. "Deserve what, Melissa? You don't deserve a dime if this is what you've been after all along." She flinched, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I leaned forward, my eyes never leaving hers. You want to talk about what you deserve? Let's talk about Anthony. Her eyes widened in shock, color draining from her face. What? Anthony, I repeated. The man you've been calling for months. The man you promised money to. The man you told you wouldn't stay with David forever. David's head whipped toward her, his face pale. What is she talking about? Melissa shook her head wildly. No, that's not true. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a second envelope, sliding it across the table to David. Phone records, I said softly. 30 calls in 2 months. And I heard her myself, David. The morning of your wedding. She told her bridesmaid she'd divorce you once she got what she wanted. The silence that followed was suffocating. David's hands shook as he pulled out the records, scanning the highlighted numbers. His face crumpled, pain and fury warring in his eyes. Melissa, he whispered, his voice hoarse, tell me this isn't true. Melissa lunged forward, grabbing his arm. David, please, she's lying. She's manipulating you because she wants me gone. I shook my head slowly. I didn't have to manipulate anything. You did it all yourself. Every word, every action, every careless mistake, you've exposed yourself. David tore his arm away from her, his voice breaking. You used me. You used our marriage. And you didn't even care about our son. Tears streamed down Melissa's face, but they weren't the tears of a woman broken by love. They were the tears of someone watching their golden plan crumble. I just wanted security, she sobbed. I didn't mean. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the hardwood. You didn't mean to ruin me? To lie to me? To play house while scheming with another man? Melissa shook her head, her face twisted with desperation. You don't understand. I understand enough, he snapped, his voice ringing with a strength I hadn't heard in years. Get out. Her eyes widened. David. I said get out. His voice thundered through the house. The children, who had been upstairs, grew quiet. Melissa froze, her face pale with fury, then turned to me, spitting venom. This is your doing. You poisoned him against me. I met her gaze without flinching. No, Melissa. You poisoned yourself. She grabbed her purse, her movements jerky and furious, and stormed out the door. The slam echoed like a gunshot, final and irrevocable. The silence that followed was heavy. David sank back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. I reached over, laying a gentle hand on his back. I'm so sorry, son, I whispered. He lifted his head, tears streaking his face. Mom, how could I have been so blind? Because you loved her, I said softly. And love makes fools of us all. But now you see the truth. And you're free. He nodded slowly, his body trembling as he tried to process it all. The weeks that followed were difficult. The divorce moved quickly once the truth came out. Melissa tried to fight, tried to spin stories, tried to paint herself as the victim, but the evidence was too strong. The phone records, her outbursts, even the neighbors who had seen her slipping away at night, it all built a case she couldn't escape. She left with nothing but bitterness, her carefully constructed life crumbling around her. As for David, he began to heal. Slowly, the weight lifted from his shoulders. He smiled more with the children. He laughed again, even if softly. He began to remember who he was before Melissa's shadow fell over him. One evening, I sat with Ethan, his small hands clutching the sapphire necklace Harold had left me. Grandma, he asked curiously, why do you always wear this? I smiled, brushing his hair back. Because it reminds me of your grandpa. And because one day, it will remind you of me. Not because it's worth money, but because it's worth love. He beamed, his eyes wide with wonder. And as I watched him, I felt a deep peace settle over me. Melissa thought she could erase birthdays, erase love, erase family. But she underestimated the strength of a mother's resolve. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't begged. I had simply waited, watched, and let her own greed destroy her. Harold once told me revenge was best served not in rage, but in patience. And he was right. Because in the end, Melissa's words came back to haunt her. He doesn't need anything this year. But she was wrong. David needed love. He needed truth. He needed freedom. And I gave him all three. And in doing so, I gave Melissa exactly what she deserved, nothing at all.